He didn't come looking for a miracle. He only stepped outside on an ordinary morning and found two German shepherds sitting at his door. One was old, weak, barely holding on. The other stood guard, silent and unyielding, as if daring the world to come any closer. There was no owner, no explanation, only a worn military backpack left in the daylight, holding a truth that would change 3 lives forever. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Red Willow, Wyoming, was a town that survived by learning not to complain. Winter stayed longer here than it did on maps, pressing itself into the land with quiet persistence. Even in early spring, snow still lined the roads and dirty, compacted banks, hardened by weeks of wind and ice. The sky that morning was clear but pale, stretched thin over the mountains, and the sunlight offered visibility without comfort. The air was cold in a clean, unforgiving way, sharp enough to wake the body fully with every breath. Thomas Hale returned from town just after 8. He drove slowly up the narrow gravel road that led to his house, the tires crunching against frozen stone. His pickup truck was old, its dark blue paint faded unevenly by years of weather, rust beginning to bloom around the wheel wells. It rattled when it climbed, but the engine was steady. Thomas kept his vehicles the way he kept most things, functional, maintained, never replaced unless necessary. At 61, Thomas was tall and lean, his frame shaped by long years of discipline rather than comfort. His shoulders remained broad, though stiffness had settled into them over time. His face was sharply defined, weathered by sun and cold, with lines that came less from age than from restraint. A short gray beard traced his jaw, uneven where old scars tightened the skin. His hair was cut close, practical, more silver than brown now. His eyes were light hazel, observant and steady, carrying the calm of someone who had learned to measure situations before reacting. He had gone into town at dawn, as he did every Saturday. The grocery store opened early, and Thomas preferred it before conversation filled the aisles. He bought the same things he always did: bread, coffee, canned food, dog feed. He lived alone, but habit had a longer memory than circumstance. Thomas turned into his driveway and shut off the engine. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then he saw the dogs. They were sitting directly in front of his gate. 2 German shepherds, not wandering, not pacing, waiting. Thomas remained in the truck for a moment, his hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. He had learned long ago to pause when instinct tightened in his chest. That pause had once kept him alive. He stepped out of the truck and reached into the bed, lifting 2 paper grocery bags. The paper was stiff with cold, the weight familiar in his hands. He took several steps forward. The younger dog stood. He was large and powerfully built, his coat a deep black and tan, clean despite the cold. His ears were upright, his posture balanced and deliberate. He moved forward just enough to place himself squarely between Thomas and the second dog behind him. There was no bark, no growl, only intent. The older dog remained near the gate. She was thinner, her once strong frame diminished by age and hunger. Gray threaded heavily through her muzzle and ears. Her coat was thick but dull, matted slightly along her sides. A heavy leash ran from her worn leather collar to the iron gatepost, secured with a tight, careful knot. When she lifted her head, her amber eyes met Thomas's without fear. Her breathing was shallow but controlled. One of the grocery bags slipped from Thomas's hand and hit the gravel. An apple rolled free and came to rest near the edge of the drive. The younger dog's gaze flicked briefly toward the sound, then returned to Thomas. Thomas raised his empty hand slowly, palm open. "Easy," he said. His voice was low, calm, stripped of command. It carried the tone of someone used to authority but unwilling to force it. The younger dog shifted his weight slightly, muscles ready but restrained, not feral, trained. That was when Thomas noticed the backpack. It rested beside the gate, placed upright where it could not be missed. An old military pack, olive drab, faded and worn. Strips of duct tape reinforced the straps and seams, layered with care rather than haste. This was not discarded equipment. It was maintained. Someone had wanted it seen. Thomas crouched slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. He retrieved the metal water bowl hanging by the porch and filled it from the spigot, the water steaming faintly in the cold air. He set the bowl near the older dog and stepped back. The younger dog hesitated, then, after a moment, he stepped aside just enough to allow her access. The older dog rose carefully, her legs trembling beneath her weight. She drank slowly, methodically, as if rationing even this small relief. Thomas noticed the effort it took for her to remain standing. This was not a dog that had wandered here by chance. Thomas glanced down the road. No cars, no neighbors. Red Willow remained quiet, wrapped in its usual isolation. He picked up the backpack and carried it inside. The younger dog watched him closely, but did not follow. The older dog lowered herself back to the ground, her eyes never leaving the house. Inside, the house was warm but spare. Everything had a purpose. Thomas set the pack on the kitchen table and did not open it immediately. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and stood by the window, watching the dogs through the glass. Years earlier, during his time in uniform, Thomas had learned that some moments required stillness before action. This felt like one of them. When he finally unzipped the pack, the sound seemed louder than it should have been. Inside, there was no food, no clothing, no comfort, only 3 items. A small bundle of cash, mostly 1s and 5s, creased and worn, tied together with paracord. Thomas counted automatically. $43. A medal. The bronze star lay heavy in his palm, dulled by age but unmistakable. You did not buy that. You earned it where few people ever stood, and beneath it, folded carefully, a handwritten note. The paper was thin, the handwriting uneven, jagged in places, written by a hand that had been running out of strength. Thomas read it once, then again, slower the second time. By the 3rd line, his chest tightened. The man who left the dogs had not abandoned them. He had calculated every step, every dollar, every mile. He had starved himself, slowly, deliberately, so the dogs could eat, could survive, could reach someone who would understand what they were. Thomas sat down heavily in the chair. Outside, the younger German shepherd adjusted his stance, angling his body slightly to block the wind from the older dog. He was not guarding territory. He was guarding her. Thomas pressed his thumb against the edge of the metal, feeling the worn metal beneath his skin. He thought of the years after he left the service, the quiet that had settled into his life, the way mornings passed without purpose beyond routine. This was not a rescue. It was a transfer of responsibility, a final mission. Thomas folded the note carefully and placed it beside the metal. He reached for his coat. When he stepped back outside, the younger dog watched him closely, but this time he did not move to block the path. Thomas knelt beside the older dog and rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. She flinched briefly, then relaxed, releasing a long, unsteady breath. "You're safe," Thomas said. The words surprised him. The sun climbed higher over Red Willow, pale and distant. The dogs remained at the gate, and Thomas Hale understood, with quiet certainty, that this morning divided his life into before and after. The watch had begun. The dogs remained at the gate when Thomas Hale stepped back outside, the cold air biting through his jacket, as the sun climbed higher over Red Willow. Nothing about the scene had changed on the surface, yet everything felt different now that he knew why they were there. The older female lay curled near the iron post, conserving strength, while the younger male stood alert, his body angled instinctively between her and the world. They did not pull at the chain. They did not whine. They waited, as if waiting itself were a duty that had been assigned to them. Thomas moved slowly, mindful of the younger dog's watchful eyes. He knelt a short distance away and studied the older one more carefully, now that fear and surprise had settled. Up close, she looked older than he had first thought. 10, maybe 11. Her coat bore the dullness of long-term malnutrition rather than neglect, and her joints, especially the hips, showed the subtle stiffness of chronic pain. There was intelligence in her eyes, but also fatigue, the kind that came from years of standing guard long after the body had asked to stop. The younger dog, by contrast, looked to be no more than 4. His coat was thick and well-kept, his muscles defined and strong. His eyes were dark, focused, and constantly moving, tracking Thomas's hands, his posture, the environment. This dog had not learned his discipline by accident. Someone had taught him where to stand, when to move, and when not to. "You're doing your job," Thomas said quietly, not expecting a response. "I see that." He rose and opened the gate fully, stepping aside to create a clear path to the porch. The younger dog hesitated only briefly before allowing the older one to move first. She struggled to her feet, and took a few careful steps forward, her nails scraping softly against the stone. Thomas noticed how the younger dog stayed close without touching, ready to support if she faltered. Inside, Thomas prepared food slowly, deliberately. He softened dry feed with warm water and added canned meat he normally saved for emergencies. He set the bowls down and backed away, allowing the dog space. The younger dog waited until the older one began eating before lowering his head to his own bowl. Even then, he paused between mouthfuls, lifting his head repeatedly to scan the room. Thomas watched from the doorway, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He recognized the behavior immediately. Protective vigilance, not anxiety, not aggression. This dog was still on assignment. When they finished eating, Thomas retrieved a blanket and laid it near the wood stove. The older dog moved toward it almost immediately, her body relaxing slightly as warmth seeped into her stiff joints. The younger dog positioned himself between her and the open doorway, settling into a sit that allowed him full view of the room and the windows. Thomas turned back to the kitchen table. The note lay folded beside the bronze star and the small bundle of cash. He unfolded it again, this time reading it more slowly, searching for details he might have missed the first time. The handwriting wavered but remained careful, every line intentional. The man who wrote it had been precise even as his strength failed. There was no name on the note, only facts. How long the dogs had been on the road, why they had been brought here, why Thomas specifically had been chosen. The writer mentioned seeing Thomas in town, noticing the way he carried himself, the way he spoke to people without unnecessary words. He wrote that he knew Thomas would understand that this was not abandonment, but responsibility passed forward. What the note did not say mattered just as much. It did not say where the man had gone. It did not say how much time he had left. And it did not ask Thomas to keep the dogs forever. It asked only that they be given dignity. Thomas folded the paper again and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He picked up the bronze star, turning it over in his hand. The metal was scratched, dulled by years of contact with fabric and skin. This metal had been carried, not displayed. Its owner had not wanted it seen. That, too, told Thomas something important. He placed the metal back on the table and reached for the phone. The call went through on the third ring. "Red Willow Veterinary," a woman answered, her voice calm but brisk. "Sarah, it's Thomas Hale," he said. "I've got 2 dogs here, shepherds. One of them's old and in rough shape. I need you to come by." There was a brief pause on the other end. How rough? Standing but barely, hip issues at least, possibly heart. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll be there in an hour," Sarah said. "Don't feed her anymore until I see her. Small sips of water only." Sarah Whitaker was in her mid-40s, tall and slim. With dark blonde hair she kept pulled back into a tight braid that brushed the middle of her back. Years of outdoor work had left her skin lightly weathered, her movements efficient and economical. She spoke directly, without softness, but her hands were known throughout Red Willow for their gentleness. She had grown up on a ranch outside town, the daughter of a horse trainer who believed animals understood intent long before words. That belief shaped her work. She treated every animal as if it were listening. When Sarah arrived, she parked her dusty SUV near the fence and took a moment to observe before approaching. She watched the younger dog's posture, the way his weight shifted as she moved closer. She did not extend her hand. She did not speak. She waited. "Good boy," she said finally, her voice low. "You're doing fine." The younger dog did not relax, but he did not advance. Sarah knelt near the older dog and examined her carefully, checking gums, listening to her breathing, running practiced fingers along her spine and hips. The dog flinched only once, when Sarah pressed gently near the right hip. The reaction was immediate and controlled, pain without panic. "She's been hurting for a long time," Sarah said quietly, "longer than she's been letting on." Thomas nodded. "She didn't come here by accident." "No," Sarah agreed. "None of this was accidental." Sarah straightened and looked at Thomas. "She needs medication, pain management at the very least. Her heart doesn't sound good. I'll need to run tests, but she shouldn't be transported far right now." "I'll make room," Thomas said. Sarah studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You sure you want to do this, Tom? This isn't a short-term situation." Thomas did not hesitate. "I know." The younger dog finally shifted when Sarah stood, moving closer to the older dog and placing his body partially over hers, as if reminding everyone present that she was not alone. Sarah exhaled slowly. "That dog," she said, nodding toward him, has been carrying more responsibility than he should. Thomas followed her gaze. So have I. Sarah gave him a brief, knowing look before returning to her truck for supplies. That afternoon passed in careful adjustments. Thomas rearranged the living room, moving furniture to create clear paths. He set up a low mattress for the older dog near the stove and placed water within easy reach. The younger dog watched every change, inspecting each item before allowing the older one to rest. As evening approached, Thomas stood at the window and looked out toward the road. He wondered, briefly, where the man who had written the note was now, whether he was still alive, whether he knew the dogs had arrived safely. Thomas did not allow himself to dwell on questions without answers. He had learned that dwelling rarely changed outcomes. What mattered was what stood in front of him. 2 dogs, one old, one young, both still working, and a responsibility that had arrived not with force, but with trust. When night finally settled over Red Willow, Thomas closed the door gently and turned off the lights one by one. The younger dog took his position near the door. The older dog slept deeply for the first time since arriving, her breathing slow and even. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the note folded neatly beside his coffee mug, the bronze star resting beside it. This was not the life he had planned, but it was the one he had been chosen for, and for the first time in years, Thomas did not feel alone with the weight of it. Morning returned to Red Willow without ceremony. The sky was overcast now, a flat, dull gray that pressed low against the mountains, muting color and sound alike. The temperature had risen only slightly overnight, enough to soften the snow at the edges, but not enough to release it. The town woke slowly, as it always did, with the kind of caution learned by places that understood how quickly weather and fate could turn. Thomas Hale woke before dawn, not because he needed to, but because sleep had grown light in recent years. He lay still for a moment, listening. The house sounded different now. There was the low, steady breathing of the older dog near the stove, deeper and more even than it had been the night before. Near the front door, the younger dog shifted position, nails clicking softly against the floor as he adjusted to the quiet changes outside. Thomas rose carefully, joints stiff but manageable, and pulled on his flannel shirt. The mirror above the sink caught his reflection briefly. The lines in his face looked deeper this morning, his eyes more alert than tired. He had carried responsibility before. That familiarity settled into him again, unwelcome but not unfamiliar. He moved into the living room. The older dog remained on the mattress, her body curled tightly for warmth, eyes half open but calm. The younger one rose immediately when Thomas entered, stepping forward but stopping short. His tail was low, his ears alert. He was still evaluating. "You stayed up all night," Thomas said quietly, kneeling to check the older dog's water. "Didn't you?" The younger dog did not move, but his gaze followed Thomas closely. Up close, Thomas noticed the faint scar along the dog's left shoulder, a thin pale line beneath the fur. Old injury. He filed that away without comment. Thomas prepared breakfast the same way he had the night before, careful not to overfeed. He administered the first dose of pain medication Sarah had left, watching closely for any reaction. The older dog accepted it without resistance, her trust simple and direct. When she finished eating, she rested her head back down, releasing a slow breath that seemed to come from deep in her chest. The younger dog waited until she was settled before approaching his own bowl. Thomas watched that too. After breakfast, Thomas stepped outside to split wood, his breath clouding the air. He worked methodically, the rhythm steady, each strike deliberate. The younger dog watched from the doorway, tracking the movement of the axe, the surroundings, the road beyond the fence. He never looked away for long. By mid-morning, the sound of an engine approached along the gravel road. Thomas straightened slowly, resting the axe against the stump. The younger dog stiffened immediately, his body angling toward the sound. The older dog lifted her head inside, ears twitching. A dusty gray pickup rolled into the drive and stopped near the fence. The driver's door opened, and a man climbed out, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the loose confidence of someone comfortable in open spaces. Mark Ellison removed his hat and squinted toward the house. He was in his early 50s, with a thick brown beard shot through with gray and a face permanently reddened by wind and sun. His build was solid rather than athletic, the strength of someone who worked with his hands daily. Mark had grown up ranching cattle outside Red Willow, and though he now ran the local feed supply store, the habits of that life clung to him. He spoke plainly, trusted slowly, and showed loyalty without noise. A knee injury from a riding accident years earlier had tempered his temper, leaving him more patient than he had once been. "Well," Mark called, stepping closer. "You weren't kidding when you said you had company." Thomas nodded once. "Morning, Mark." Mark stopped short when he noticed the dogs fully. His eyes moved first to the younger one, taking in the stance, the alertness, the distance maintained, then to the older one, visible through the doorway, resting but watching. "Those aren't strays," Mark said. "No," Thomas replied. "They aren't." Mark approached slowly, hands visible, posture open but respectful. The younger dog took a step forward, then stopped, watching Mark's face rather than his hands. "Good dog," Mark said quietly. "You're doing fine." He turned to Thomas. "You want me to call animal control?" "No," Thomas said. "They're staying." Mark studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Figured as much." He glanced back at the dogs. "You need supplies?" "I'll manage," Thomas said. "For now." Mark tipped his hat. "If that changes, you know where to find me." He paused, then added, "You doing okay, Tom?" Thomas considered the question honestly. "I will be." Mark accepted that without pushing. He returned to his truck and drove off, the sound fading into the distance. Inside, the younger dog relaxed marginally, though he remained alert. Thomas returned to the kitchen and retrieved the backpack again. He opened it fully this time, checking seams, pockets, hidden compartments. There was nothing else inside, no map, no identification, no clue to where the man who wrote the note had gone, only intention. Thomas sat at the table and let himself think about that man for the first time as a person rather than a message. Someone who had known hunger well enough to measure it. Someone who had known loyalty deeply enough to trust strangers. Someone who had watched Thomas from a distance and decided quietly that this was the right place. That choice carried weight. Around noon, Sarah returned with additional supplies. She moved with her usual efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting medication. She noted small improvements already, steadier breathing, slightly more mobility. "She's holding," Sarah said. "That's something." Thomas nodded. "And if she doesn't," Sarah met his gaze directly, "then we make sure she's comfortable. That's the promise." The younger dog watched every movement Sarah made, but he no longer bristled at her presence. He recognized her role now. That afternoon, Thomas took the older dog outside briefly, supporting her carefully with a harness Sarah had brought. The younger dog walked at her side, matching her pace exactly, stopping when she stopped, waiting when she waited. It was not obedience, it was coordination. As the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Thomas stood on the porch and watched the dog settle again near the warmth inside. The house felt smaller, fuller, altered in ways he had not anticipated. He thought of the quiet years before this morning, the way days had passed without distinction, the way he had told himself that solitude was choice rather than refuge. Now there was work to do, not dramatic, not heroic, necessary. Thomas closed the door as night approached. The younger dog took his position near it without instruction. The older dog slept, her body finally at rest. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the note folded neatly beside his coffee mug, the bronze star beside it. He did not wonder anymore whether he would keep them. That decision had already been made. The question now was how much of himself he would have to give in the process. Outside, Red Willow settled into darkness, the cold returning quietly. Inside, the watch continued. The first real crisis arrived without warning, the way most true ones did. It did not announce itself with drama or noise. It came quietly, wrapped in routine, hidden beneath a morning that looked no different from the ones before it. Red Willow woke under a low ceiling of clouds, the light dim and flat, pressing down on the town like a held breath. Overnight, the temperature had dropped again. The snow that had softened during the previous afternoon froze hard, turning the yard into a brittle sheet that cracked faintly under weight. Thomas Hale noticed it the moment he stepped outside to check the woodpile. His knees protested more than usual, the cold working its way deep into the joints. Inside the house, the older dog did not rise. Thomas paused at the doorway, sensing it before he saw it. She lay on the mattress near the stove, her body still, her breathing shallow and irregular. One eye was half open, unfocused. Her chest rose, hesitated, then fell again with visible effort. The younger dog stood over her. He did not pace. He did not bark. He stood rigid, head lowered, eyes locked on her face, his entire body pulled inward with a tension that vibrated through the room. When Thomas took a step closer, the dog turned his head sharply, not in warning, but in urgency, as if to say, now. Thomas knelt beside her immediately, his movements calm but quick. He placed 2 fingers against her gums, pale. He listened to her breathing, uneven and wet. Her heartbeat was fast but weak, fluttering beneath his hand. "This is it," he murmured, not to himself, but to the younger dog. The dog met his gaze and did not look away. Thomas reached for the phone and dialed Sarah without hesitation. The call connected instantly, as if she had been expecting it. "I'm on my way," she said before he could finish explaining. "Keep her warm. Don't move her unless she stops breathing." Thomas set the phone down and wrapped another blanket around the older dog, tucking it carefully beneath her ribs. The younger dog lowered himself beside her, pressing his body along her back, sharing warmth without crushing her fragile frame. His breathing slowed deliberately, deep and steady, as if lending her his rhythm. Thomas watched that and felt something tighten behind his ribs. He had seen men do that once, long ago, sharing breath, sharing heat, refusing to let someone slip away unnoticed. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, her SUV fishtailing slightly on the frozen drive before coming to a stop. She moved fast, coat unbuttoned, medical bag already in hand. Her face was set, focused, the lines around her eyes deeper than usual. She knelt beside the dog immediately, listening, checking, measuring. The younger dog did not move away, but he allowed her hands to work, his eyes never leaving the older dog's face. "She's crashing," Sarah said quietly. "Heart and lungs. This isn't pain anymore. This is exhaustion." Thomas nodded. "What do you need?" "Time," Sarah replied honestly, "and luck." She administered medication with practiced efficiency, adjusting dosages, monitoring response. Minutes passed slowly, each one stretching thin. The older dog shuddered once, a full-body tremor that left her gasping. The younger dog pressed closer, letting out a low sound deep in his throat. Not a whine, but something steadier, something learned. Gradually, the breathing evened out. Not strong, but stable. Sarah exhaled slowly and leaned back on her heels. "She bought herself a little more time," she said. "Not a lot." Thomas rested back against the cabinet, the tension finally releasing from his shoulders. "What happens next?" he asked. Sarah met his eyes. "We manage, carefully, and we prepare." The younger dog remained pressed against the older one long after the immediate danger passed. When Sarah eventually stood, he shifted only enough to allow her to gather her equipment. He did not leave his position. Later that afternoon, once Sarah had gone and the house had settled again, Thomas sat at the kitchen table with the backpack open in front of him. He had avoided it since the morning. Now he knew avoidance would not change what was coming. He examined the pack again, this time with slower hands. In a small side pocket, stitched nearly shut, he found something he had missed before, a thin strip of fabric, folded tight. A name was written on it in black ink, the letters faded but legible. Elias Mercer. Thomas stared at the name for a long moment. Mercer was a common name, but something about the careful way it had been written suggested intention. This was not an afterthought. This was an identification meant to be found when the time was right. Thomas folded the fabric carefully and placed it beside the note and medal. He did not know who Elias Mercer had been yet, but he knew enough to understand the kind of man he likely was. Someone who planned, someone who finished what he started. Outside, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. Thomas looked up as a chestnut horse moved slowly along the fence line, its breath steaming in the cold air. The rider sat upright in the saddle, her posture easy and practiced. Anna Keller reined the horse to a stop near the gate and raised a hand in greeting. She was in her late 30s, tall and lean, her blonde hair pulled into a low ponytail beneath a worn wool cap. Years of ranch work had hardened her muscles and sharpened her movements. Her face bore a thin scar along the cheekbone, a reminder of a fall from a young horse years earlier that had broken her collarbone and changed her caution forever. Anna spoke softly by habit, not from shyness, but from respect for animals. "Mark said you had dogs," she called. Thomas stepped onto the porch. "That's right." Anna dismounted smoothly and approached the fence on foot. The younger dog rose immediately, placing himself between her and the house, stance wide and alert. Ishena stopped without being told. She studied him with interest rather than fear. "He's good," she said quietly. "Really good." "Yes," Thomas agreed. She glanced past him towards the older dog resting inside. "And she's tired." "That too." Anna nodded once, accepting that. If you need help later, lifting, transport, anything, I'm around. Thomas appreciated that she did not ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. Thank you. She remounted and rode on, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. As evening approached, the older dog slept deeply, medication holding steady. The younger dog finally allowed himself to lie down, though he kept one paw touching her flank, a constant point of contact. Thomas sat nearby, the note unfolded in his hands again. He read it once more, slower now, hearing the voice behind the words. He wondered how long Elias Mercer had known this moment was coming, how long he had watched his body fail while his sense of duty remained intact. Thomas understood that kind of imbalance. He looked at the dogs and felt the weight of what stayed rather than what left. Responsibility did not disappear when someone was gone. It settled into those who remained. That night, as the wind rose outside and the house creaked softly in the cold, Thomas did not retreat to his bedroom. He pulled a chair closer to the mattress and stayed there, listening to the older dog breathe, watching the younger one watch her. There would be no heroics here, no sudden recoveries, only presence. And sometimes, Thomas knew, presence was the hardest thing to give. The house remained quiet. The older dog breathed, the younger one did not move, and the watch continued. The storm arrived overnight, quiet at first, then steady, the kind of weather Red Willow had learned to expect without warning. By morning, snow drifted against the windows in soft, uneven waves, and the world beyond the house narrowed to shades of white and gray. The cold deepened, not sharply, but persistently, seeping into wood and bone alike. Thomas Hale had not slept. He sat in the chair beside the mattress near the stove, his coat still on, boots unlaced but not removed. The older dog lay curled tightly, her breathing shallow but consistent, each rise and fall carefully watched. The younger dog remained pressed close to her, his body curved protectively along her spine, one paw resting lightly against her flank. He had not eaten since the night before. He had not closed his eyes. Thomas understood that kind of vigilance. At dawn, when the light finally filtered weakly through the cloud cover, Thomas rose and moved quietly into the kitchen. He poured coffee he would not finish and picked up the strip of fabric again, the name written on it still sharp in his mind. Elias Mercer. Names carried weight. Some arrived with noise and recognition. Others surfaced only when they were no longer spoken aloud. Thomas suspected this one belonged to the latter. He reached for the phone and dialed a number he had not used in years. The call rang longer than he expected before it was answered. "Hale," a man's voice said, gravelly and tired. "Morning, Bill," Thomas replied. "It's Thomas." There was a pause, then a low exhale. "I wondered when I'd hear from you again." Bill Garner had once served with Thomas decades earlier, back when the world had been defined by lines drawn in sand and blood. Bill was in his late 60s now, heavier than he used to be, his once black hair worn long and white, his beard thick and untrimmed. An old blast injury had taken most of the hearing from his left ear and left a permanent stiffness in his gait. Bill lived alone outside Cheyenne, surrounded by relics of a life he rarely spoke about. He remembered everything, even when he pretended not to. "I need to ask you something," Thomas said. "Do you remember a man named Elias Mercer?" The silence stretched. "Yes," Bill said finally. "I do." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. "Tell me." Bill did not rush his answer. "Mercer was infantry," he said. "Quiet, observant, the kind who didn't waste words. He had dogs with him sometimes, on certain assignments. Never talked about them much, but you could tell they mattered. More than people, maybe." Thomas pictured the dogs in his living room, the younger one watching, always watching, the older one holding on through pain without complaint. "What happened to him?" Thomas asked. Bill exhaled slowly. "War ended, he didn't. Last I heard, he drifted, town to town. Wouldn't stay anywhere long. Some of us tried to reach him. He always said he was fine." Thomas knew that word well. "He was sick," Thomas said. "I'm not surprised," Bill replied. "He never believed he deserved help." They spoke a few minutes longer, sharing fragments rather than a full story. When the call ended, Thomas sat quietly, the phone still in his hand. The storm pressed against the house, the wind rising, rattling the windows. Behind him, the younger dog stood. Thomas turned slowly. The dog had risen from his place beside the older one, and now stood rigid, ears forward, eyes fixed on Thomas's face. He had heard the tone of the call, if not the words. Animals understood emotion long before language. "It's his name," Thomas said quietly. "Elias Mercer." The dog took a step forward, then another, until he stood directly in front of Thomas. He lifted his head and released a low, controlled sound, not a growl, not a bark. Recognition. Thomas nodded once. "I thought so." The older dog stirred, her breathing hitching briefly, before settling again. The younger dog returned to her side immediately, lying down with deliberate care. Later that morning, the storm eased enough for movement. Sarah arrived again, bundled against the cold, her expression guarded. She examined the older dog carefully, noting the steady but fragile condition. "She's stable," Sarah said, "but that doesn't mean safe." Thomas met her gaze. "I know." Sarah hesitated, then spoke more softly. "I need to ask you something difficult." Thomas waited. "If she stops responding, if she's in pain we can't control, you'll have to decide how far you want to go." Thomas did not answer immediately. He looked down at the older dog, then at the younger one, whose body tensed slightly as if sensing the conversation's weight. "We'll cross that bridge when we reach it," Thomas said finally. Sarah nodded. "That's all I needed to hear." That afternoon, a vehicle Thomas did not recognize pulled slowly into the drive. A dark green SUV, newer than most seen in Red Willow, tires crunching carefully over the frozen gravel. A man stepped out, tall and lean, dressed too lightly for the weather. His coat was clean, his boots expensive, unused to snow, his hair was dark, neatly trimmed, and his face bore the sharp lines of someone accustomed to control. He hesitated near the fence, uncertainty written plainly across his posture. "Thomas Hale?" the man called. Thomas stepped onto the porch. "That's me." "My name is Caleb Mercer," the man said. "I'm looking for my father." The name settled heavily into the air. Caleb Mercer was in his mid-30s, tall like his father had been, but thinner, his build shaped more by long hours at a desk than physical labor. His beard was short and carefully kept, his hands clean, his eyes strained by exhaustion rather than cold. He carried himself stiffly, as if unsure how to stand in a place like this. Guilt clung to him as tangibly as the snow on his coat. "I think," Thomas said, "carefully. You've already found him." Caleb swallowed. His gaze drifted past Tom and into the house, landing on the two dogs near the stove. His breath caught visibly. "He loved them," Caleb said quietly, "more than anything." The younger dog rose immediately, positioning himself between Caleb and the older dog. His stance was rigid, protective. Caleb stopped where he stood, hands lifting slightly. "I'm not here to take them," he said. "I wouldn't. I didn't know where else to go." Thomas studied him, taking in the tension, the restraint, the unspoken regret. "Come inside," Thomas said after a moment. "But move slowly." Caleb obeyed without question. Inside, the older dog lifted her head. When her eyes settled on Caleb, something changed. Her breathing hitched, then steadied. She released a soft sound deep in her chest. Caleb dropped to one knee without realizing it, his composure finally breaking. "Hey, girl," he whispered. "I'm here." The younger dog did not relax, but he did not advance. Thomas watched the exchange, the missing pieces beginning to align. This was not the end of the story Elias Mercer had written. It was the part he could not finish himself. Outside, the storm faded into silence. Inside, the house held its breath, waiting to see what would stay and what would change. The watch continued, but it no longer belonged to one man alone. The house felt smaller once Caleb Mercer crossed the threshold. Not crowded, but altered, as if the air itself had shifted to accommodate unfinished history. Outside, the storm had broken apart into scattered clouds, leaving behind a muted afternoon light that slipped through the windows without warmth. Snow still covered the ground, but it no longer fell. What remained was what had already landed. Thomas Hale closed the door gently behind them. Caleb stood just inside, unsure where to place himself, his posture stiff, hands loosely clenched at his sides. Up close, he looked older than his 35 years. His face was narrow, the cheekbones sharp, his jaw shadowed by a carefully trimmed beard that could not hide the tension beneath it. His dark hair was neatly cut, but his eyes told a different story. Tired, overworked, carrying the weight of decisions postponed too long. He smelled faintly of city soap and cold leather, a scent that did not belong in this house. The younger dog noticed it immediately. He stood again, placing himself between Caleb and the older dog, his body angled in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. This was not aggression. It was clarity. Caleb noticed too. He froze, then slowly lowered himself to one knee, keeping his movements deliberate. "I'm not here to change anything," he said quietly. "I just want to see her." The older dog lifted her head, her eyes focused on Caleb's face with surprising sharpness. For a long moment, she did not move. Then she let out a soft sound, barely audible, something between a sigh and a recognition. Her tail gave a faint, tired twitch against the blanket. The younger dog did not relax, but he did not advance. Thomas watched from a few steps away, his expression unreadable. He had learned long ago that moments like this did not need interference. They needed space. Caleb reached out slowly and rested his hand on the floor near the older dog's paw, not touching her yet. His hand trembled slightly. "Hey," he said again, voice rougher now. "I'm here." The older dog shifted, just enough to allow his fingers to brush the edge of her fur. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, holding his gaze. Trust, fragile and conditional, settled between them. Thomas exhaled quietly. They moved into the kitchen after a while, the younger dog following closely, never more than a few feet from the older one. Caleb sat at the table, shoulders slumped now that the effort of holding himself together had slipped. "I didn't know where he was," Caleb said, staring at his hands. "Not really. I told myself that for years, but the truth is, I didn't look hard enough." Thomas poured coffee for both of them. He placed the mug in front of Caleb without comment. "Elias Mercer didn't leave much behind," Thomas said evenly, "but what he did leave was deliberate." Caleb swallowed. "He always was." He looked up then, meeting Thomas's eyes. "He wouldn't have chosen just anyone." Thomas accepted that without false modesty. "No." Silence settled again, not awkward, but heavy. That evening, Sarah returned once more to check on the older dog. She took in Caleb's presence with a quick assessment, noting the resemblance immediately. She said nothing at first, focusing instead on vitals, listening carefully, adjusting medication with practiced precision. "She's stable," Sarah said finally, "but she's not improving." Caleb stiffened. "How long?" Sarah did not soften her answer. "Days, maybe weeks, hard to say. Her body is tired. It's been tired a long time." The younger dog watched Sarah closely, then turned his attention back to the older dog, pressing his shoulder against her side again. He had heard that tone before. Animals understood finality better than people like to admit. Later, after Sarah left, the house grew quiet again. Evening settled in, and Thomas lit the lamp by the window. Caleb remained at the table, his coffee untouched. "I want to take responsibility," Caleb said suddenly, "for her, for both of them." Thomas did not respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, studying the man across from him. He saw the guilt, yes, but also the uncertainty. Wanting responsibility and being ready for it were not the same thing. "This isn't something you can undo if you decide it's too heavy," Thomas said. "They don't adjust to abandonment twice." Caleb flinched, but he did not argue. "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I came, not to take them away, to understand what that responsibility actually costs." Thomas nodded once. That answer mattered. Outside, the younger dog rose suddenly, ears pricked, body alert. He moved to the door and stood there, waiting. Thomas followed his gaze. Headlights appeared briefly at the edge of the drive, then disappeared. No vehicle stopped. The younger dog remained tense for several seconds longer, then relaxed marginally, returning to his place beside the older dog. "He's deciding who stays," Caleb said softly. "Yes," Thomas replied. "And who doesn't?" That night, Caleb did not ask to stay, but Thomas offered anyway. The guest room had not been used in years. Caleb accepted with quiet gratitude. Thomas did not sleep much. He sat again near the older dog, listening to her breathe, watching the younger one maintain his vigil. He thought of the choice Elias Mercer had made, not to cling, not to ask, but to place his trust carefully where it would hold. That trust was now being tested. By morning, the older dog's breathing had changed. Slower, more labored. Sarah was called again, her voice tight but calm on the phone. When she arrived, she examined the older dog carefully, then looked up at Thomas and Caleb together. "This isn't an emergency," she said, "but it's a turning point." Caleb's hands clenched. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't have much time to decide how you want this to end," Sarah replied. "Comfort can be controlled, pain can be managed, but the direction has to be clear." Thomas felt the weight of that settle heavily in his chest. The younger dog rested his head on the older dog's shoulder, eyes half closed but alert. He did not look at either man. He did not need to. Thomas understood then that no amount of care or intention would change what was coming, but presence still mattered. Choice still mattered. He looked at Caleb. "This decision can't be delegated," he said. "Not to me, not to the vet, not to time." Caleb nodded slowly, tears finally breaking free. "I won't run from it," he said. "Not again." The older dog exhaled softly, as if the tension in the room had eased just enough. Nothing had ended yet, but the path forward had narrowed, and for the first time since the dogs had arrived at his gate, Thomas felt certain that whatever came next would be faced together, not alone. The watch did not end. It simply changed hands. Morning arrived thin and colorless, the kind that did not fully commit to day. Red Willow lay quiet beneath a veil of low cloud, the mountains barely visible, their outlines softened, as if the world itself were choosing restraint. The temperature hovered just below freezing. Snow no longer fell, but it had not retreated either. It waited, settled into corners and shadows, holding its ground. Thomas Hale woke to the sound of breathing that was not his own. He sat upright in the chair beside the mattress, the stiffness in his back registering second to the change in rhythm he heard. The older dog's breaths were slower now, drawn out, each one deliberate, as though she were deciding whether the effort was still worth it. Her eyes were open, unfocused, the amber dulled, but not empty. She was awake. She was present. The younger dog lay pressed against her side, his head resting across her shoulders, his body curved protectively around her frame. He did not sleep. He never truly had, not since she had begun to fade. His ears flicked once at Thomas's movement, then settled again. He knew who belonged in this room. Caleb Mercer stirred on the couch nearby, blinking awake, confusion crossing his face before memory returned. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair, his movements quiet and respectful, as if the room were something sacred. "It's time, isn't it?" he asked softly. Thomas did not answer right away. He leaned forward and rested his hand lightly against the older dog's ribcage, feeling the shallow rise and fall beneath his palm. The warmth was still there, but it was thinner now, less anchored. "Yes," Thomas said finally, "it's close." They called Sarah just after sunrise. She arrived without hurry, as she always did, her presence steady rather than urgent. She moved carefully, kneeling beside the dog, checking vitals she already understood. When she looked up, her expression was gentle but firm. "She's not in pain," Sarah said. "Not yet. But she's tired. We can keep her comfortable for a little while longer. Hours, maybe." Caleb swallowed. "And if we wait?" "She'll slip eventually," Sarah replied. "Possibly quietly, possibly not. There's no certainty there." The younger dog lifted his head slightly at the sound of Sarah's voice, then lowered it again when she fell silent. He did not interfere. He listened. Thomas stood and moved to the window, staring out at the gray morning. He had been present for endings before. Some had been rushed. Others had been delayed beyond kindness. He had learned that timing mattered as much as intention. He turned back toward Caleb. "This isn't about holding on," he said. "It's about letting go with purpose." Caleb nodded, tears tracking silently down his face. "She gave him everything," he said. "The least I can do is not make this harder than it needs to be." Sarah prepared the medication quietly, explaining each step without unnecessary detail. The older dog watched her with mild curiosity, no fear. When Sarah paused, waiting for the signal, Thomas knelt beside the mattress. The younger dog shifted then, rising slightly, his body tense. Thomas placed a hand against his chest, steady and calm. "You can stay," he said quietly. "You're supposed to." The dog hesitated, then lay back down, pressing closer to the older one, his nose resting against her neck. Caleb knelt on the other side, his hand trembling as it found the familiar curve of her shoulder. "I'm here," he whispered. "You're not alone." The older dog's eyes flicked briefly toward him. Her tail gave a faint, tired movement. Recognition. Sarah administered the medication gently. Time slowed. The room seemed to narrow, the air thickening with stillness. The older dog's breathing eased, each breath softer than the last. There was no struggle, no tension, just release. The younger dog stiffened once, a sharp intake of breath, then went completely still. When it was over, Sarah rested a hand against the dog's side, then looked up. "She's gone." Caleb bowed his head, his shoulders shaking silently. Thomas remained where he was, his hands still resting against the now still body. He had expected grief to arrive like a wave. Instead, it came like weight settling evenly, familiar and heavy, but not crushing. The younger dog did not move. Minutes passed before he lifted his head slowly. He sniffed once, then again, carefully. He nudged her shoulder gently, not in panic, not in denial. When she did not respond, he lay down again, pressing his body along hers, his breathing deep and steady. "He understands," Sarah said softly. "Yes," Thomas replied. "He always has." They wrapped the older dog in a blanket later that morning, working slowly, deliberately. Caleb insisted on helping, his movements careful, reverent. The younger dog followed every step, his presence constant, but he did not interfere. Outside, the clouds lifted slightly, allowing a thin band of pale light to touch the ground. Thomas chose a spot near the edge of the property, beneath a stand of old pines where the earth remained soft beneath the snow. He had already prepared the place the night before, not because he was certain, but because he believed in readiness. They carried her together. The younger dog walked beside them the entire way, his head high, his posture controlled, not frantic, not broken. At the graveside, Caleb hesitated, then removed his jacket and laid it gently over the blanket. "He would have wanted this," he said quietly, "something of mine." Thomas nodded. They lowered her carefully. There were no words spoken then. None were necessary. When the earth was filled back in and the ground smoothed, the younger dog stepped forward. He sniffed the place once, then sat, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the trees ahead. He did not whine. He did not paw at the ground. He held position. Thomas stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back. Caleb stood on the other side, his face drawn but calmer than it had been in days. After a while, the younger dog turned his head and looked up at Thomas. It was not a plea. It was a question. Thomas met his gaze steadily. "She's safe," he said. "You did your job." The dog studied him for a long moment, then rose and stepped closer, his shoulder brushing Thomas's leg briefly before moving ahead toward the house. The decision had been made. Back inside, the house felt different again, not emptier, quieter, balanced in a new way. That afternoon, Mark Ellison stopped by briefly, having heard from Sarah. He removed his hat when Thomas told him. "She was a good one," he said simply. "You did right by her." Anna Keller rode past later, slowing her horse when she saw the fresh earth. She did not dismount. She tipped her head in acknowledgement and continued on. Respect, offered without intrusion. As evening approached, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bronze star lying between them. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," he said. Thomas considered that. "You stay," he said, "at least long enough to finish what you started." Caleb looked up. "And him?" He nodded toward the younger dog, who lay near the door, alert but calm. Thomas followed his gaze. "He's not lost," he said. "He's waiting." Caleb nodded slowly. "So am I." That night, Thomas slept in his bed for the first time since the dogs had arrived. The younger dog took his position near the door, as he always had. The house creaked softly in the cold, but it felt steadier now. The watch had ended for one. For another, it had changed shape. And for the men who remained, something had been given back, quietly, without ceremony, time. Spring did not arrive in Red Willow all at once. It never did. It came in fragments, thin light in the mornings, snow retreating from south-facing slopes, the smell of wet earth rising through thawed ground. The mountains loosened their grip slowly, reluctantly, as if releasing winter only because they had been asked politely enough times. 3 weeks had passed since the burial beneath the pines. Thomas Hale noticed the change first in the mornings. The house no longer felt paused when he woke. It moved again. The kettle whistled with more insistence. The floorboards complained less. Even the air seemed to circulate differently, as if something unseen had shifted its weight. The younger dog, still unnamed, deliberately so, had changed as well. He no longer slept by the door every night. Some nights he chose the hearth. Other nights he positioned himself at the base of the stairs, facing outward. He was no longer guarding a single presence. He was learning the shape of a place. Caleb Mercer stayed. At first, he told himself it was temporary, just long enough to finish paperwork, to help with repairs, to clear his head. But days turned into weeks, and weeks settled into a rhythm. He took on work without being asked, fixing fences, chopping wood, organizing the barn Thomas had neglected for years. His hands blistered and hardened quickly. The sharpness in his face softened. He slept through the night for the first time in a decade. Caleb was a tall man, broad-shouldered but lean, his strength quiet rather than imposing. His hair, once carefully styled, now fell where it wanted, threaded with early gray he had stopped trying to hide. He wore the same jacket most days, canvas worn thin at the elbows. There was a scar along his jawline, faint but visible, a remnant of a car accident in his 20s that had taken more than skin. It had taken his sense of control. Since then, he had built his life around precision and distance. Red Willow was undoing that. One morning, Thomas found Caleb sitting on the porch steps, staring out toward the pasture. The dog lay beside him, alert, ears tracking movement in the trees. "I've been thinking," Caleb said without looking up, "about what comes next." Thomas poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed one over. "That usually means trouble." Caleb huffed a brief smile. "For me, it usually meant running. And now? And now I don't want to." He hesitated. "I don't know if I know how to stay, but I want to learn." Thomas studied him carefully. He had seen men arrive broken before, most left the same way. This one was different. He wasn't asking to be fixed, he was asking to be useful. "There's work here," Thomas said. "Not glamorous, not clean, but it matters." Caleb nodded. "So does that dog." As if summoned, the dog lifted his head and looked between them. They named him later that week. It happened without ceremony. Caleb was brushing him near the barn, working, dirt from the thick black and tan coat. The dog stood patiently, his build powerful but controlled, ribs now fully covered, muscles defined beneath healthy weight. He was younger than the older dog had been, 6, maybe 7, but carried himself like someone who had seen enough to age him beyond numbers. "You don't feel like an accident," Caleb said quietly. "You feel intentional." The dog's ears flicked. "Watch," Caleb added. "That's what you do. That's who you are." The dog looked at him for a long moment, then turned his gaze outward again, scanning the fence line. "Watch," Thomas repeated later. "It fits." Watch adapted quickly to the sanctuary's rhythms. He was not aggressive, but he was decisive. He placed himself between danger and vulnerability instinctively, between Thomas and a loose horse, between a frightened rescue hound and a stranger's approach. He did not bark unnecessarily. When he did, people listened. It wasn't long before others noticed. Anna Keller returned first, leading a chestnut mare into the lower pasture. The horse was young, skittish, her flanks marked by old rope burns. Anna moved with her usual quiet authority, her silver hair braided tightly, her posture straight despite her years. "That dog," she said to Thomas, watching Watch from beneath the brim of her hat. "He's steady." "He's learning," Thomas replied. "No," Anna said. "He already knows. He's just deciding where he belongs." Mark Ellison came next, bringing with him a call from the county. Word had spread, quietly at first, then with purpose, about what Thomas was building. Not just a sanctuary for animals, but something looser, broader. "They're asking if you'd consider taking in service dogs nearing retirement," Mark said, "the ones that don't place easily." Thomas looked toward the yard, where Watch sat beside a trembling shepherd mix, his presence grounding the younger dog without touch. "Yes," he said, "but not alone." Caleb stepped forward. "I'll help." That summer, the sanctuary changed shape. They built new enclosures, wider and lower, designed for aging joints. Sarah Miller visited regularly, offering guidance, supplies, and the occasional sharp reminder not to overextend. She approved of Watch immediately. "He's not replacing what was lost," she told Caleb once. "He's extending it." By August, there were 3 dogs like Watch on the property, working breeds, worn but capable, each carrying invisible weight. Watch became their anchor. He did not dominate. He coordinated. Caleb found himself laughing again, often unexpectedly. Once, when a retired Malinois outsmarted him and escaped the pen, Watch sat squarely in the gate, blocking the exit with nothing but posture and patience. Caleb stared at him, breathless, then laughed until his knees buckled. "You're better at this than I am," he told the dog. Watch blinked slowly. The town followed. Volunteers arrived on weekends. Kids came with their parents. A local carpenter offered to build adaptive ramps. A retired teacher donated blankets she had quilted herself. No one called it a miracle. They called it momentum. On the 1-year anniversary of the storm that had brought everything into motion, Thomas stood near the pines again. The ground was green now, thick with grass and wildflowers. The stone marking the older dog's resting place was simple, weathered, but cared for. Caleb stood beside him. Watch sat at their feet, posture relaxed but alert. "I used to think legacy was something you left behind," Caleb said. "Turns out it's something you carry forward." Thomas nodded. "That's the trick most of us miss." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long gold shadows across the pasture, Watch rose and moved toward the fence line. He paused, waiting. Thomas smiled faintly. "Go on," he said. "You've got the watch." Watch stepped forward, his silhouette strong against the fading light. Not alone, never alone. The house behind him was warm. The land around him was awake. The work was ongoing. The watch did not end. It widened. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes, they come quietly, on four legs, standing at a doorstep in the morning light. This story was never just about dogs. It was about presence, about staying when it would be easier to walk away, about love that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, and doesn't ask to be seen. The Bible tells us that God often speaks in a still, small voice, not in the storm, but after it passes. And maybe that voice sounds like loyalty that refuses to leave, or a second chance placed gently in front of someone who thought that they had missed all of theirs. In our daily lives, we walk past quiet miracles every day. A neighbor who needs kindness, a child who needs safety, an animal who only needs someone to stay. God does not always ask us to be heroes. Sometimes, He only asks us to be present. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who may feel forgotten. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every one. And if you believe that no child, no soul, and no animal should ever face fear alone, please subscribe to this channel and become part of this community of hope. Let us pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the quiet miracles you place in our lives, often disguised as responsibility, loyalty, and love. Please watch over every person listening to this story. Protect the lonely, comfort the brokenhearted, and guide those who feel lost back toward the light. Teach us to recognize your presence not only in blessings, but in chances to serve. May we love with patience, act with compassion, and never turn away from those you place in our care. If you receive this prayer, write Amen in the comments below. May God bless you, your home, and all those you love.